Deathworlders to the Extreme by Aqua Star Dark. Chapter 14. Two Near Heart Attacks. The escape from Shinto's point of view and a quest for water. The moment things had begun to fall apart was the moment that Hitoshi began to panic. Maybe he should have slowed down with opening up the crack, but once things began to collapse, even when he paused, well, at that point he knew he couldn't go back. Shuddering waves ran up and down his arms with every hit, and his fingers felt numb from how tightly he gripped the rock. Falling and swirling dust debris had Hitoshi shutting his eyes as tight as he could, which left him blind as he hit the wall. Though peculiarly, he kept hearing a faint rumble as he did so that only encouraged him along as the image of shaking wreckage popped into his mind. I just need to keep going. Then I can get out. I'm not going to be trapped here. I'm going to get out. Clang! Clank! The sound of something large and near collapsing made Hitoshi's eyes shoot open. An enormous mistake when he was assaulted by the burning agony of his eyelids being coated in the miniature and sharp debris, and the sudden realization that he had to get out ASAP weighed down on Hitoshi like a mountain as he flung the rock with everything he had with every strike. His eyes hurt so much, and he just wanted nothing more than to wash them in water as he cried out from the pain. The rumbling grew until Hitoshi finally recognized his eraser's deep purr among the chaos. The sudden audible meow from Eraser, along with a brief tap on his arm, alerted Hitoshi to the outside and taking a chance. Hitoshi blindly groped along the side of the crack. It's big enough. I can get through. Hitoshi didn't hesitate as he slid through the crack, its sharper edges forming burning cuts on his hands as he grabbed at the edges to haul himself through. The ground was rough on Hitoshi's knee as he collapsed outside the collapsing ship and felt something soft, not unlike a giant paw, on his back. Pushing him along as a familiar fabric, skin feel Eraser's scarf tightly settled itself around his head. He leaned against Eraser as the cat alien led him away from the wreck and patted and gripped at the jumpsuit-clad alien for comfort as he gently cried. I just escaped nearly dying. The realization snuck up on Hitoshi, walloping him as he accidentally gripped at Eraser's broken arm, making him stiffen up for a moment that Hitoshi held it. Quickly, Hitoshi let go from the flood of emotion that followed, had tears flowing from his eyes as the delayed terror of the situation choked him. I would have died if Eraser wasn't there. Hitoshi threw his arms around Eraser just as he was being lowered to the ground, the cat alien freezing at the sudden contact, and Hitoshi offered a purr to try and communicate his gratitude. Thank you. He pathetically whimpered as tears slid down his face. He was hurt so much, his ankles aching in twinges that such an injury often offers. His body was covered in cuts from the metal and debris of the collapsing spaceship. His eyes burned with the debris that, despite all of Hitoshi's tears, didn't seem at all eager to come out. Yet he was alive, thanks to this cat alien he'd probably scared half to death already in the short time that they'd known each other. Not even a day. Hitoshi's breathing was heavy as his whimpers petered off, and slowly he unwrapped his arms and slid to the ground, tears falling. Eraser purred next to him, the end of his scarf swishing at one such tear as Hitoshi breathed. I need some water to wash my eyes in. Wait! Hitoshi shot up, eliciting a surprised chuff from Eraser. He turned to the cat alien and mined the shape of something large, his nut backpack, and gestured up towards what Hitoshi assumed was where the branches of the trees were. He repeated the motion once, twice, a third time before he heard the rustling of fabric as Eraser stood, and then nothing for a minute or two. Eraser just stood there, motionless. The gentle paw that lifted Hitoshi up guided him only a meter to the right until Hitoshi found his hand rubbing against a rather familiar bark. Is this? Hitoshi blindly hauled himself up the tree, ignoring the startled voice of the cat alien as he felt along the tree for branches and fell along the branches for his lost bag. Please tell me it didn't fall and spill everywhere. I don't know how long until the dust actually damaged my eyes for real. He ignored the possibility that his eyes might already be damaged beyond repair, and the fact that he didn't know how much about eyes beyond washing out contaminants ASAP, being particularly helpful. It's agony to climb the tree with the many cuts on his hands, and Hitoshi could feel his blood staining the branches as he climbed along. Yet he kept going despite the pain and despite Eraser's efforts to pull him down with his scarf. You're the one who brought me to the tree, silly cat. You're the one that brought me to the tree, silly cat. Just as Hitoshi started to think that Eraser had brought him to the wrong tree, he felt his fingers run over the familiar straps of his bag. Yes! Crawling up, Hitoshi fell along the edge of the branch until he found a good place to unhook his bag. Lifting it and getting it off, however, was an immense difficulty for Hitoshi after he spent minutes previously hitting himself to freedom. His hands, stung, cuts, burned the secret at the strap of the backpack, and his arms ached terribly as he lifted it, let alone for a full 10 seconds as he carefully got out of the tree branch and got into his back. It's good that it's heavy. It's good that it's heavy, he thought, breathing heavily. That means there's still water in there. Eraser whined below as Hitoshi nearly lost his balance putting on the pack, Eraser's scarf nudging him back in place before he could fall. I'm fine, Hitoshi gasped, clinging to the trunk before carefully sliding down. He hadn't felt his staff anywhere, but he assumed it fell down when he made his mad sprint to rescue Eraser. I'll be able to search for it once I wash out my eyes. When the Deathworlder began motioning for an object large, round, and in the branches of the trees, it didn't take Shota long to figure out what it wanted. The large lump object was on its back earlier. How did he figure it out? Well, it wasn't actually easy not to spot the giant round thing hanging in the branches where the Deathworlder was gesturing. Oh, why did it want it? It's so injured, he thought, staring at the object. The sight of the thing alone was a testament to how powerful the Deathworlder had been before. On the other hand, even while injured, it was definitely able to sit up much, much faster than I would ever be able to. Shota stood and stared up at the object of interest. It wasn't high, not compared to how far the Deathworlder had climbed to sleep, but with Shota's arm broken, there's no way I can retrieve it on my own. There wasn't much he could do to retrieve it. Unless, at this point, only the Deathworlder would be able to retrieve it. For a few clicks, Shota mulled over the idea. On the other hand, the Deathworlder was incredibly injured and was likely exhausted from getting free. There was also the fact that it was leaking liquid from its eyes, something that Shota couldn't at all be sure that what was the origin or reason was for. Broken vein in the eyes, a sign of distress, its eyes melting from dust? Those were all concepts that occurred to Shota. On the other hand, the only other time it had requested for anything was when he was asking for the rock that eventually resulted in an escape, and for Shota's presence, which, when denied, ended up nearly dying from purposeful blood loss. At the very least, I can show the Deathworlder where its thing is. He finally decided, considering the Death Worlder didn't seem overall concerned by the fact its eyes were leaking. Even when Shota touched some of might not have the liquid might not be as much of a concern as Shota originally thought. Though he couldn't be sh- he couldn't be for though he couldn't be sure. Sorry. One pod, Shota carefully guided the Death Worlder up. He was surprised that he could even walk, and to the base of the tree the Death Worlder hovered a hand over the bark, and just for a tick Shota glanced at the pile of supplies from earlier. What are you doing? What are you doing? Somehow, despite his exhaustion and injuries, the Death Worlder was What are you doing? Somehow, despite its exhaustion and its injuries, the Death Worlder was climbing up the tree. It was close to the trunk and mainly relied on the branches as it sightlessly climbed, already higher than Shota could reach with his paw. It was the shock of the moment that kept Shota from reaching as quickly as he should have, for he carefully tugged with the end of his scarf still attached to the Death Worlder's head. But the Death Worlder ignored Shota's insistence, even as a red trail of blood followed its path. How can it climb while injured? It'll bleed out at this rate. Yet somehow it did, and somehow it managed to, with obvious difficulty, retrieve the lump that was hanging in the tree. Shota could have sworn his heart stopped when the Death Worlder began to tilt off the tree, but a quick push from his scarf was fortunately enough to remedy the situation. Though that did little to relieve the terror that had sprouted in the small moment as the Death Worlder gasped in fear. This Death Worlder is going to be the death of me, I swear. The Death Worlder returned the lump to its back and began its journey down. Shota laying a guiding paw on its back once he could finally reach it, only for it to drop the rest of the way. It stumbled for a moment on its feet, clearly unbalanced by the lump on its back, until it caught itself with a whine. It dropped down into its behind and removed the lump from its back before opening a loose piece on the top. It's a bag, Shota realized. The Death Worlder reached in a hand and removed water. The water dropped from the Death Worlder's hands, yet a small pool was settled in the center. It was thirsty? This was what the Death Worlder risked its life for? We already had water pouches. Shota buried his face into his paw and groaned, for yelping in shock when he found the Death Worlder sticking its face into the water. Hang on, stop that. Are you trying to drown yourself? Shota gripped at the Death Worlder's arm, only for it to look back up, its eyes red. Its eyes were injured. Is it using the water to help wash them? But Shota let the Death Worlder return to washing its eyes as he watched, his mind whirling. Earlier its face went red from blood rushing to its wound when I rejected it. Could this be something similar? If so, what? It could just be irritation from the dust. Deadpan, the practical teacher, part of his mind. It literally died. It literally nearly died from me rejecting it not even 2 hours ago, replied the observant survival part of his mind. Shut it, thought Shota as he mentally slapped himself before helping the Death Worlder wash its eyes by holding into the container while it reached in for water. Whatever is wrong with its eyes, it's likely that washing them would help solve the problem, especially considering that's what the Death Worlders are doing already. If that way water was leaking from its eyes earlier to try and get rid of the dust in its eyes, that would make sense for survival. Eventually, the Death Worlder seemed satisfied by how much its eyes had been washed. Something supported by the fact his eyes were no longer red, and began to wander despite Shota's protest. Unfortunately, it didn't seem to listen. It seemed to search for something around the base of his tree, and since Shota wasn't willing to start using extra force to control it, it was still a Death Worlder, after all. He wasn't able to do much to stop it other than lightly scold it with whatever wordless communication he knew. I really hope it knows what it's doing. I really hope it knows what it's doing, because if it doesn't, then I'll doubt we'll survive on this death world. End of this chapter. Chapter 15. A Stick and a Log. Summary. Shinto looks for a staff and Aizawa does a log. That makes no sense. Okay. Hitoshi wandered around the base of the tree, searching for a staff as the racer tried to get him to sit down. As much as that sounded nice, however, he really wanted his staff back, as every step without it was a step that sent twinges of pain racing through his ankle, something that preferably he wouldn't have to deal with anymore. Also, considering how long he spent carving the spear at the end of the stick, and considering he used it as to catch a fish earlier, he really needed it, so he wasn't going to stop searching until he found it. Unfortunately, with all the debris and sticks around, the fact that his vision was still slightly blurry from all the dust, he was having a bit of a struggle finding his staff. Eraser chuffed as Hitoshi stumbled over a stray root, coming up behind him to gently tug at his arm as Hitoshi tried to regain his balance. Hitoshi only whined and replied, continued his search. He'd found, expectantly, that using animal, technically cat, noises did wonders for Eraser to communicate, even if it was just to disagree about things. Eraser's scarf, still wrapped around his head, bapped irritably at his face, leaving spots of numbness, so Hitoshi wrapped the end of his hand to ease the twinging pain of his cuts. At the very end, they had been washed with his hands, so they weren't bleeding much anymore, but they still hurt. Hitoshi wandered over to a promising-looking stick, only to whine in disappointment when he found it would just be a regular branch from the tree. Eraser glanced at the stick, then at Hitoshi, ears questioningly facing towards Hitoshi. "I'm trying to find a staff I carved from a stick," he explained, despite the cat alien not being able to understand his language. "I worked hard on it, and it's helpful, and I want it back." Eraser said something Hitoshi would never even be able to hope to translate, and walked over to a pile of supplies Hitoshi found in the rubble while he was trapped. "At least I'm not stuck there anymore." And so, for several agonizing minutes, Hitoshi wandered aimlessly, searching for a stash as Hitoshi hovered from the side until, "Is that—" "Yes!" Hitoshi squealed. "Yes! Yes!" He squealed with delight as he hugged the staff to his chest before burying it in the end of the ground from the use of the cane. Eraser stared at the staff for a moment before promptly turning away and lying on the ground in their little camp, saying something as he did so. "This is a victory for me, I have you know." "This is a victory for me, I have you know," commented Hitoshi as he plopped down next to the large cat alien, who looked up as Hitoshi came down. Dropping his staff next to his pack, he'd rest for a bit. He was pretty tired, after all, but then he wanted to get moving ASAP so he could get back to his pod. "What about Eraser?" his mind whispered. "We found him. He's ours now." Hitoshi internally slapped himself. "Eraser may be a cat, but we can't just adopt him like a stray off the street," he yelled back at his mind. "Oh, really? What's stopping you? Not the law, and his ship is broken anyway. So it would be the better solution to his housing problem to bring him to the pod anyway." Toshi really couldn't argue with that line of logic, but he couldn't just adopt an alien. That would but he couldn't just adopt an alien. That would be like kidnapping. Ignoring his mind, Hitoshi glanced up at the sun. It was about midway through the sky, though Hitoshi didn't yet feel particularly hot as a likely result of the higher elevation. Fortunately, a racer shifted next to him and sat up as Hitoshi began to stand for a minute. After a minute of sitting, and pulled him down with his scarf as he stared at Toshi's staff. Hitoshi sat with a huff, deciding to finally obey the cat alien's insistence that he rest. He retaliated by forcing Eraser to lie down as well. If he was being forced to relax, then Eraser should too. Eraser's red eyes glowed as he stared at Hitoshi, as though glaring into his soul for a moment before Hitoshi realized Eraser had always seemed to avoid eye contact. Not now. Hi? Eraser stared at him for a moment more until Hitoshi averted his eyes and fully laid down. Careful to avoid irritating the cuts on his hand, he heard Eraser shift for a moment before hearing a faint beep. A beep that was followed by Eraser beginning to say something. Hitoshi glanced over to find Eraser speaking to a small machine. A communication device, maybe? Why didn't he speak into it earlier? Hitoshi wondered for a moment before going back to ignoring it. Whatever it is, I doubt I have the vocabulary to help out. Once the Deathworlder finished risking its strength finding a pointy stick, Shota was finally able to get it to lay down to rest, though it forced him to lie down as well. I guess it feels more comfortable to do things when others around are doing it as well. Well, if me lying down is what it takes for it to rest its injuries, then I'll do it. Shota sighed. Worse than my students, really. At least Midoriya rests his injuries half the time when he's not actually doing something. That reminds me. Reaching his one good arm, sadly he wasn't like Hisashi with his pair of arms and pair of claws tipped wings, into the utility belt around his waist, Shota retrieved the voice recorder he kept stored for longer missions. It was small, black little thing with enough storage in it for a full 3 cycles of recordings, and since he'd replaced the storage only a short while ago, he definitely had enough to take a log of his experiences on this death world, and with the Deathworlder. He pressed the recording button, and the machine made a small beep as it began to record. This is Aizawa Shota, Hero Eraserhead. During this mission to capture the Deathworlder on the She ship run by Overhaul, we are shot at by the criminals on the ship. Despite our presence being specifically requested by one of the She's, during the attack, all but most of the vital systems on my ship were damaged, beyond repair, and my arm was broken. I ended up drifting through space with no means of communication until I crash landed on the Class 7 Deathworld D-71. Shota glanced at the Deathworlder, which lay face up, eyes closed. A few words after crashing, I heard signs of life outside my ship, and upon investigation, I found the source to be, and I still can't believe it, the Deathworlder we originally intended to capture. I assume that it got an escape pod and ended up sending itself into this planet. Shota sighed. It tried to get in, but eventually gave up and climbed to a tree for the night, which suggests it both has trees on its planet and possibly lives in them as well. If not spent a lot of time in them, once it left my ship alone, I treated my injuries. However, upon sunrise, the Deathworlder broke into my ship and nobody would believe him if he said it, would they? And the Deathworlder saved me from a tree that crashed into my ship, collapsing it at the cost of being trapped itself. While trapped in Nickelodeon, it often initiated eye contact and the ability to make its blood solidify within clicks, even head wounds. It also demonstrated very clear, might I add, an ability to both feel emotion, critically think, and use tools. The deathworlder is both sentient and sapient. Not only that, but I have reason to believe it is a youngling, as it has shown itself to be rather emotionally dependent in a way and prone to pack bonding, as it seemed to become attached to me rather quickly, despite me attempting to shoot it with darts previously. It also used vocalization common in kits as well. It hasn't been particularly aggressive, but much of its behaviors is though it has gotten upset enough when I acted like it was that it sent blood rushing towards one of its injuries. I'm not sure what to make of it, honestly. Even so, it isn't that it isn't dangerous. It was able to open the packaging of a metal packet with its teeth, was able to break through the catch of my ship, perform multiple energy-consuming tasks in a row, and healed quickly. Even so, I don't believe to be in too much danger as long as it is fed and I don't provoke it. If it decides to attack me, however, I doubt there's much I can do, as it seems entirely immune to my venom in its natural state. And mine. Despite being trapped, it collected the resources it could find within the ship and delivered them to me, and I was able to request a round rock from me after it found to use a bat from me that it later used to bash open a crack in the wreckage until it escaped. At the moment, it has 2 head wounds, which I've wrapped in my scarf, though I suspect the blood has already solidified and multiple cuts on its hands. I'm not entirely sure whether or not they still apply, but it previously had an injury on its leg. It had dust in its eyes that it later washed out with water it collected. Shota hesitated. It has demonstrated behavior that is risky to itself, and when under great emotional distress, sent blood towards its wounds. It also leaked water from its eyes after its eyes were injured from the dust, something I'm particularly concerned about, as considering how vital water is to organic beings. I can't help but assume it is something like sweating, an emergent release of water that can have devastating consequences on one being's body. It doesn't seem too concerned about it, however, so I assume that isn't something too much to worry about for now. The deathworlder rolled next to Shota, staring at the recorder in his hand before wrapping its arms around its head. I will continue logging later. For now, it seems my talking is disturbing the deathworlder. This is a racer head. Log 1.